Hi, guys, and welcome to the sixth episode of Run the Gauntlet. I'm Cate Hogan, a developmental editor who has been lucky enough to work with some of the best-selling authors out there, including published authors, but also lots of really talented indie authors as well. And this program is all about you guys sending me your opening scenes, and 1 month I choose one project and I apply a developmental assessment of that project's opening scene. What's the catch? There's really only one, and that is that the developmental assessment is recorded live and shared with you so that we can all benefit from the insights that are garnered, have a conversation around what makes for the most compelling storytelling, and hopefully support each other along the way. So, as you are soon going to discover, this month's project is Cossington by the very talented Mandy Newman. Now, Mandy has written a work of commercial women's fiction. It has some pretty strong romantic elements in it. Mandy is a really experienced journalist and also a published nonfiction author. So you'll soon see she is really polished and clearly an experienced writer. And before this book, she also self-published a work of fiction called Love Song. So if you like Mandy's storytelling and you enjoy her style, you want to read more of her work, please go on and purchase her first novel and support her writing. I'll include a link to that below. And as it goes without saying, please subscribe. Please tick the bell for notifications. Please like this video. Every time you do something like that, you're telling YouTube that this is a piece of content that isn't spam, isn't trash, is genuinely out there to help people, and that helps elevate the video, which is always really greatly appreciated. So without further ado, let's jump straight into Cossington. If you haven't watched this program before, what I do is I read the excerpt, the piece of the scene, then I pause and go back, and we'll discuss each of these very mysterious comment boxes to see what kinds of pieces of developmental feedback I have for the text that we've just read. And once we finish with this initial paragraph, we'll move on to the next one. So let's get started. Chapter 1. Snapping the case of her Chanel pirate red satin lipstick, Lizzie admired her Botox to perfection face in the vanity mirror of her prized ebony BMW Z4 Roadster. Her goddess pout, perfectly pert breasts, tight ass, and sexual artistry made most straight men in Sydney's eastern suburbs weak at the knees, just not the man she desired the most, her brother-in-law. Hamilton, in the driver's seat, expertly squeezed the car into the last remaining car space near Cassius College. The working-class boy from the lake, the man who had the ear of the premier, didn't like trying to jam himself into anything, a suit, a party, or a fancy-pants icebreaker at one of Sydney's most elite boys' schools in swanky Bellevue Hill. The lines crisscrossing his tanned face showed how painful the last year had been. We don't have to stay too long. We don't have to stay long. Promise? I've got this. Elation soared through her chest. Got him. Squeezing his rough builder's left hand, she stopped herself from weaving her long spray-tanned fingers through his silver hair and leaning in and kissing his tender heart-shaped lips. I am grateful. His deep voice cracked with grief. She gasped. He closed his ocean eyes. A deep and abiding love for him and her sister's children bubbled over like a simmering saucepan of butterscotch. For decades, her ovaries, her heart, had had a hankering, a yearning for something more. She'd tried money, sex, real estate, drugs, playboy lovers, and a husband, briefly. She'd even hooked up with a woman for a few months to try and fill the void. Nothing had made the emptiness disappear. until now. So this is not actually a scene break, but I'm going to pause here just to go through some of the comments that I want to share with Mandy and also you guys. So one of the first things I note here is that doesn't Mandy give us a really impactful, and that's what I look for in a great opening scene: impact, personality, make a statement, grab our attention, and whatever that statement is, make it clear. And Mandy's done a wonderful job of that. I do think, though, that there are a lot of individual details in this, particularly in this opening sentence. We have all of these visuals and images that our minds, our imaginations are bringing to life as we navigate the sentence. From the, snapping the case, the Chanel Pirate Red lipstick, her Botox to perfection face, the vanity mirror, her prized ebony BMW Z4 Roadster. It's a lot. And really, if the statement is just to show that she's kind of a princess, we could probably just do that through the description of her using designer lipstick. We probably don't need lots of other kind of stuff attached to that to make that kind of impression with the reader. And certainly as the scene unfolds, there's lots of room to continue weaving that kind of description in. So we don't need to cover too much particularly in the very first paragraph. What happens if we make the reader have to do too much of a kind of mental gymnastics to kind of get through the paragraph? It can signal to the reader that the rest of the writing is going to be, to a degree, overly complex or convoluted. And really, we don't want to create any resistance at all. We want the reader to just seamlessly, effortlessly, slip into the piece. And lose themselves, not to become too aware of the mechanics of the writing. And if we pack too much in, we reveal those mechanics to the reader and get in the way of them and their ability to just fall into the fantasy. Maybe you disagree. Maybe you feel that sentence is perfectly crafted. You love the imagery, all of it. If that's the case, let Mandy and me know. We would love to hear from you. So comment below. This whole program is about sharing and exchanging ideas. As much as you might have guessed, I do love the sound of my own voice. So moving on to the next point. Here you'll see that Mandy has alluded to this character being in love with her brother-in-law. Fabulous. These are the kinds of intriguing hooks that we want to lure the reader into the story straight away. The brother-in-law, is he still married to her sister? Is this an affair? Does he know that she has feelings about him? Is it taboo? Straight away, we have a wonderful question that raises lots of other questions, but if we want to discover the answers, we have to keep reading. And this is how we hook a reader into our story. My next point here continues on. The working class boy from the lake, the man who had the ear of the premier, didn't like trying to jam himself into anything: a suit, a party, or a fancy pants icebreaker at one of Sydney's most elite boys' schools in swanky Bellevue Hill. Again, it's just a lot of individual pieces of information. And really, if you're coming from the perspective of what does the reader need to know in terms of this scene making sense and having adequate context, really it's kind of three key things. It's that we're dealing with a bit of a princess as our point of view character. She has the hots for her brother-in-law, who is really kind of has a blue collar background and is more of a salt of the earth kind of guy, and they're going to a swanky party. Now, we can create that understanding with the reader without getting too much into lots of individual specifics. And certainly, setting this story in the eastern suburbs of Sydney, for Sydney-siders who are reading this, we have an understanding of what that means. And there are lots of kind of, as a Sydney-sider, we all kind of roll our eyes at the eastern suburbs in some ways because it can be a little bit, Botoxed to perfection, as Mandy said. So certainly there are points here that are probably more relevant to readers from Sydney than potentially international readers. But even so, we don't want to become too cluttered with too much individual detail. Now, I noted that when I first read this excerpt and we got to this point here, the lines crisscrossing his tanned face showed how painful the last year had been. We don't have to stay long, promise. Because we're launching off with a piece of description about Hamilton, that then indicates that this next line of dialogue is being spoken by him. I think that, in fact, we have our female character speaking at this point, Lizzie, but that's not really clear. So I think that it's always great to try and use the description to indicate who is speaking, but either way, make sure that it's clear that the reader knows who's speaking at a given moment, because we just want to avoid those little moments of kind of like confusion or distraction, and keep the reader focused on what's important, which is what's happening between the characters on the page. Why do we find them compelling? Why is there a sense of tension? What's the subtext, etc.? I also question the use of italics here. Obviously, this is a relatively minor point, but if we keep reading the scene, we learn that she's putting on lipstick in the mirror of her BMW car. He's driving her car. They don't need to stay long. Because it's in italics, it's suggesting that she's saying, we don't need to stay long, but I might stay longer, but you can get out yourself. But then they're also sharing a car. This is a very minor thing, but just reading it, I found that as a point of confusion. And again, if we can avoid anything that doesn't absolutely support the story and embellish the scene, then it's always best to try and do so. So let's move on to the next section. And I'm sure you'll agree, Mandy has a really personality-driven, evocative style of storytelling. So it's wonderful to, get a sense of the power of her writing. But like all things in life, it's also about balance. So, spending the steamy summer months splashing in the shallows in the emerald waters of Bondi Beach with salt water lapping around her slender ankles, watching Teddy, Emily, and Will dash in the water with Hamilton by her side, had led to the epiphany. They were what she needed, a gorgeous, worthy of a feature in Vogue family. Hamilton could not only make her rich and powerful, she, Lizzie, the younger sister of Ice Queen Caroline, could be the mother to those divine motherless children, and a comforting widow to her widow. When she married Hamilton, all the threads of their broken family would be braided together. She could give the children their destiny of a fabulous five-star life. She stared at Hamilton's patrician, masculine profile. Almost 60, he had vibrant young blood pulsating in his veins and dazzling blue eyes that in the last year she had lost some of their shine. With long, lean legs and a broad chest, he had sculpted muscular shoulders of a man who had surfed all his life. So tender with the twins, so attentive to Will, he rode motorbikes and drove speedboats, could make a mean lasagna, bring together deals, build a house, iron his own shirts, fix a leaking tap, and talk about his feelings. All these qualities made him something of a rarity. Unlike most of the men in the East who made their money by selling cars, real estate, shares, or drugs, he made and did things. Oh, Hamilton, I know. We've got each other through this horrible time. That is why we work. I am not immortal. Time means something. Life is precious. I don't just want the house in Bellevue Hill, the farm in the Southern Highlands, and the weekender at Palmy. I want love, deep, abiding love. I want to spend the rest of my life with someone of quality and status. I want to be with a man who charges into life, who draws people to him. With an aching longing, she turned to look at her sister's husband. "Take me, Hamilton, take me." He turned off the engine, sighed, and then opened the car door, gently closing it. So, so quite a few moments there where I wanted to burst out in laughter, but I didn't want to interrupt the narrative. So you can see, as I said, really fun style of writing here, really well suited to women's fiction, commercial women's fiction as a genre. The tone, the style is exactly on point, which is wonderful to see. The first comment I have here, and this is where the whole conversation around multi-protagonists comes into the story. So what's interesting with this novel is that we're just going to look at the opening scene in this developmental assessment, but the scene after this jumps into Hamilton's point of view, and I don't think I'm giving away too much of a spoiler to say that this story is actually about Hamilton and his relationship with another woman, and Lizzie is a point of view character who is, from what I can tell, a semi-antagonist, or at least an antagonistic kind of force in the story. So what we see here is that Lizzie is flawed, and certainly introducing characters that aren't perfect. Well, that's to be expected if they're antagonists, but introducing any character at the start of a story with flaws is always interesting because it's more compelling, it's more authentic. That the flaws in their character hint at tension that will come later in the story and cause trouble, and that sense of tension and anticipation, that foreshadowing of future trouble, again makes us want to keep reading, makes us want to find out what happens, how far will Lizzie go to achieve her dreams and aspirations. So all of that is fantastic. What I would say though is that one of the key things that we want to achieve in an opening scene is empathy. We want to present a character to the reader who is compelling in some way, and part of what makes them compelling is that they have a problem or a desire, an unmet need, or they find themselves in an unsustainable situation that on some level we empathize with, and it's that emotional investment in their situation that makes us care enough about them to want to read on and find out what happens next. One of the creative risks that this scene will have to grapple with is that we're introducing a kind of fundamentally unlikable character to the reader. And also keep in mind that in structural terms, and this is by no means a hard and fast rule, but it is a reality, readers tend to latch on to the first character we introduce them to. So when 9 times out of 10, when you're reading a novel, the character who is the focus of that opening scene is the protagonist of the story, is the person that we will follow for 50,000, 100,000 words. And readers are trained to kind of expect and anticipate that. And even on a subconscious level, they're immediately determining inside themselves, what does this person stand for? Do I like them? Don't I like them? What box am I going to put them in? And so when you open a novel with an antagonistic character, and I'm not talking about, say, if we had a prologue where we saw an evil villain doing something in the middle of a dark, stormy night, and then chapter 1 opens with our hero in a totally different situation. This is different in that we're not clearly saying this is the antagonist of the story, but wait, you're about to meet your main character. We're kind of presenting her as a central part of the story, one of the main characters that we're going to become invested in. But then the personality traits that we're seeing don't totally support that, in that she's clearly kind of superficial. She's clearly a bit of a gold digger. But then on the other hand, she's kind of, mourning the loss of her sister. She seems to be really genuinely invested in the children and in Hamilton. And the love that she feels, even if it is kind of founded upon superficial things, is definitely real to her. So in terms of, as the reader, when you sit here going, do I like this character or don't I like this character? It's hard to place her in a box. Now, that raises another interesting conversation point, which is, are characters all good or all bad? Of course not. We don't want to, try and say this character is perfect or this character is evil. People are nuanced and often contradictory, and it is in those contradictions that we find really interesting gray areas and compelling kind of character development. But one thing I would say is sometimes I feel that with character development, it can be more effective to make a clear statement about a character at the front, and then allow the nuances of that character, their contradictions, the fact that they're not all bad, to actually come through as we are discovering them, as we are getting to know them and peeling back the layers of the onion. So let's say if we have a superhero book and we meet the evil antagonist, the supervillain who's going to cause all of the problems in the story. In the very first introduction to that character, we're probably going to present him as truly evil, truly despicable. This guy is, or woman is capable of doing things that make your toes crawl. As the story unfolds, our view of that character might shift. We might learn that actually this supervillain was treated really badly in their developmental years, or suffered some incredible trauma that, forever shifted the way they understood the world, or put them in this combative place, whether it was them against the rest of the world. And from that, deep hurt, deep trauma, what was once love got twisted into something evil. All of these are interesting nuances to explore in a character. Do we want to introduce them up front in the very first scene? Probably not, because in the very first scene, the reader wants to have a clear idea of who is this person? Good, bad, how do I feel about them? And it's as the story unfolds that we can peel back the contradictions. Yes, they're a supervillain, but they were also human at one point, and the things that made them a supervillain were in fact outside of their control. And as we start to explore these gray areas, they become a more and more fascinating character, an interesting character that we understand more deeply. Now, that could be something to keep in mind in how we introduce Lizzie. Firstly, if Lizzie should be the first character that we meet, she isn't one of the two main characters who will achieve a kind of, happier ending. And in that, from an emotional viewpoint, we're going to be most invested in Hamilton finding happiness and the woman that Hamilton ends up having a relationship with. I hope I'm not giving away too many spoilers by saying that. But they're going to be the characters that we really care about. So potentially they're the characters that we should be meeting first. Yes, this scene focuses a lot on Hamilton, but it's probably not as impactful as a point of view scene where we get to really climb inside his head. And also, by having a scene where we start in his point of view or the other woman's, the romantic heroine's point of view, we're immediately sending a signal to the reader saying, this is who you should care about. With this scene, that signal is a little bit twisted because we're kind of thinking, is this story going to be about Lizzie and Hamilton falling in love with each other? And if that's the case, she seems pretty unlikable for a romantic heroine. Is this someone that I want to see achieve a happy ending? Is this someone that I can feel, emotionally invested in? There are some kind of sticking points there. And the other thing I would say, as I kind of alluded to up to this point, is I think instead of showing someone's contradictions, that actually that they're a really good person and kind and love their niece and nephews and mourn their sister and just want to be happy, but they're also really superficial and craving power and status and all of the rest of it. I probably wouldn't be bringing both of those ideas in this very first scene, because there's a lot of emotional nuance and contradiction to cover there, and it's harder to make a direct, clear, clean statement to the reader. Instead, I would probably be really presenting Lizzie as a superficial, horrible character in this scene. So it's clear to the reader you're not meant to like her. She's definitely an antagonist. She's definitely going to spell trouble. Don't empathize with her at all because she's a gold digger. But as the story unfolds, I would be showing Lizzie's softer side. There's more to her than first meets the eye. She's actually looking for love. She just doesn't realize it fully yet. So, I would be unpeeling those layers of the onion as the story unfolds, as opposed to trying to capture the full scope of that nuance in just this opening scene. Now, if we go down to, the code word. So every episode, I include a code word buried somewhere in the episode. Today's code word in honor of Cossington is BMW. If you want to apply for Run the Gauntlet and submit your own scene, please mention the code word in the application form. You'll see the link below, and that just tells me that you actually watch the program, you actually take part in it, and you're a part of the community, because I get a lot of applications every month, and while mentioning the code word won't make or break your application and get you an instant kind of gold ticket, it does just help me kind of identify how many people are really taking part in the program. Now, the next point I had here is I just love the melodrama of the writing here. I think that Mandy has done such a great job of kind of bringing Lizzie to life in that way. You could tell that Lizzie really is the star of her own kind of internal movie, which is just so much fun. I actually saw a really great opportunity here to have a kind of comedic moment. So if you see this section, this paragraph, we get right into her interior monologue. Oh, Hamilton, I know, we've got each other through this horrible time. Time means something, life is precious. And it kind of, with an aching longing, finishes with, take me, Hamilton, take me. And then, the scene kind of, I've created a break here, but the scene continues. He turns off the engine sides, open the car door, gently closing it. I see a fabulous opportunity here to play off all of the tension that we've kind of created here in this section, and also show that the feelings really are very one-sided. So imagine if, take me, Hamilton, take me. And in that moment, he leans towards her. And, what's he going to do? Is he going to embrace her? Is he going to kiss her? Is he finally going to acknowledge this, underlying chemistry between them? And he's just grabbing his, briefcase from the footwell of the car, for example, and leaning across her and pulling back. So I think that we could have a little piece of action there, a little piece of description, which just shows how kind of deluded she is, because she really thinks that there's something incredible potentially, or there's the potential for something incredible between them. But he's not really sensing that at all. He's just a bloke going about his day, mourning his dead wife and trying to get through one second to the next. So I felt there was an opportunity there to really, have it seem like, from her perspective at least, he's about to do something, and then the, horrible disappointment of him doing something really banal, like grabbing an old coffee or something, and getting out of the car. Okay, moving on to the next section. Inhaling deeply, she put her shoulders back, ready to swing stage 2 of her plan into action. Hamilton opened her door. Impressed, she alighted, swinging her curved legs around to the road. Swimming in a sea of anticipation, she dreamed of wonderful places they would go. It had been a year, and Hamilton needed a companion with whom he could travel through his serious world to shake the hand of the Premier and entertain Chinese investors. Her heart swelled in triumph, just like it did when she'd maneuvered some anxious middle-class chump into handing over $5 million for a property only worth close to $3. He needed her. Hopefully, he needed her enough to marry her. She patted his knobbly, sun-kissed hand and tucked her thin fingers around his. His fingers had the power to make the world safe. All the ducks were lined up in a row. What a wonderful life they were going to have together. The trips, the houses, the sex. He just didn't know that yet. Better still, he would give her the means so that she could make a mark on Sydney. She would live on in the memory of Sydney-siders. He had agreed to fund her development company to build and sell luxury, oversized and overpriced apartments to the fools seduced by Sydney's evil charms. They were going to make a killing. With his capital and her know-how, they were going to raise the eastern suburbs and make a fortune working with developers. She just had to get rid of his awful brown R.M. Williams boots and get him to put the largest rock Sydney had ever seen on her finger. Breathing out deeply to steady her growing desire, she led him down the footpath dotted with blossoming frangipani trees towards Cassius College. Tonight would be the night. Tonight he would see another side to her, the softer, motherly, caring side. That's what he wanted. She would deliver, and after dinner when they drove her back to his place, even though Caroline had lived and taken her last breath there, and that made her feel slightly uneasy, he would see her in all her glory, an agent provocateur lingerie. And don't you worry, Hamilton King, I have news for you. You're going to be my next husband, and I'm going to be your next wife. So much tension. I love it. That's what I'm always looking for. So let's go straight to the comments. I don't actually have this as a comment, but just a really brief point here. You know, we have a mention of the Premier above earlier in the scene. And, you know, less is more. We don't need multiple references to get the impression that he's a powerful and wealthy man. So, you know, one reference is more than enough. And the more individual references we add, the more individual details a reader is having to keep track of, when really they just want to focus on the emotional dynamics of what's happening in the scene and why we should care about these characters. Here, we start to position her as the antagonist of the story, but a reader could be wondering if she is in fact an unlikable protagonist. I touched on that in the last section, so I won't go deeply into it again, but certainly my feeling would be, if we're going to have the first point of view scene with our antagonist, make it really obvious that she's an antagonist. Make her pretty clearly morally questionable right from the very first line, and then bring her softness in and her likable elements in as the story unfolds, and we learn her different dimensions. But here it's hard to get a grip on who exactly she's meant to be in this story, whether we're actually meant to kind of like her and just hope that she becomes a nicer person as she follows her dreams, or if she is in fact you know, the bad guy. And if we had met Hamilton first, for example, and then we had another point of view scene with Hamilton's actual eventual main love interest, and then we had a point of view scene with Lizzie, just the structural order of those introductions would hint to the reader that Lizzie is the antagonist. But because we're meeting her first, that throws that into question, because usually that would mean she's actually our protagonist. So again, just slight confusion there as to how to position Lizzie and how we should feel about her. Final points. As I've said, I absolutely love the punch this character delivers. In the following chapter, we jump into Hamilton's point of view and we learn that he despises pretension and all the things that are important to Lizzie. So it's obvious that their match will never work. In subsequent chapters, we see Hamilton meet another protagonist point of view character and his actual romantic interests. So we have two protagonists, and we have Lizzie here, who is a kind of a semi-antagonist from my understanding, my conversation with Mandy. She's not an all-out bad guy, but she is an antagonistic force in the story. So, whenever you're working with a protagonist story, how you introduce the different characters, how you shift the reader's emotional investment from one character to the next, and how you indicate to the reader who we're meant to care about, who is going to be the most pivotal player in the story, who has the most to gain, who has the most to lose. These are all things that are easy to determine with a single protagonist, because they're the hero of the story. They have the most to gain. They have the most to lose. In your stock standard romance novel, the protagonist is often split into 2 points of view, the hero and the heroine, or whoever the two central romantic figures are, genders aside. And again, we know immediately who we're meant to care about, what they have to gain, what they have to lose. But once you go past 2 central protagonists to 3 to 4 to, I've read books with 6. With Game of Thrones has lots of, main characters. That's when it can become a little bit trickier. It's not to say that it can't be done, obviously it can, but you need to be strategic about the message that you're sending the reader in terms of, this is the person who is going to drive the story forward. This is the person that has a quest and a goal and ambition to pursue. This is the person, as I said earlier, who has the most to gain, and this is the person who has the most to lose. And that person is who we empathize with most. That person is who we're cheering on from the sidelines. So if we make that person in the first scene the antagonist, that can be tricky in terms of engendering a reader's empathy. This is not just someone who is suffering or who wants something that is beyond their reach. It's someone that I care about, that I want to see succeed, and that's harder to do with an antagonist. So what recommendations would I make? Without reading the story in full, it's really hard to say. Potentially, as I mentioned earlier, making it really clear that she's an antagonist right from the start could help us position her so that we know, when we don't get a possible confusion around whether this is actually a protagonist. It just feels a bit off. Or reordering the scenes and reordering who we meet first could also be helpful. You could even play with it in some way where we see, we start in Hamilton's point of view and see that he's not attracted to her at all, but he really does think she's a good person and she's really nice, and he's so lucky. He would have been lost if she wasn't helping him, in the aftermath of this terrible loss of his wife and raising their kids. So we get this impression of Lizzie in the first scene, let's say, that she's actually a real helper and really, just doing it out of the goodness of her heart. And then, maybe we have a point of view scene with the romantic heroine, for example, where she has an interaction with Lizzie in the bathroom, and suddenly we see, okay, Lizzie is not the person that Hamilton thinks she is. So, by reordering the introductions, potentially we can still set up the same premise. We can still introduce the same characters, but we can make it clear that Hamilton and this other woman are our main characters. Lizzie's very much an antagonist, and use the points of view to actually express just how clueless Hamilton is in terms of how dangerous Lizzie is and how much he's actively playing him without him knowing. And this is the beauty of POV shifts. We can use those POVs to really send a very clear message about what the characters do know and what they're missing. What we as a reader can see clearly that is a total blind spot for them. And therefore, as a blind spot is a big vulnerability, a big liability. More tension, more reason to keep reading and find out what happens next. So that covers everything that I have for this read. I want to wrap things up by saying to Mandy, thank you so much for sharing your beautiful, finely crafted really rich writing with us. So it's been such a pleasure assessing it, and I hope that some of the feedback proves helpful. Guys, please share your thoughts in the comments below, or send me a private email, whatever you feel comfortable with. We would love to hear your feedback. As I said, buy Mandy's book, support a great indie Australian writer, and if you're feeling brave, send your scene in for the next Run the Gauntlet. Applications are currently over. What do you have to lose? Nothing. So I would love to read your work. Please share it with me. If you caught the code word, be sure to include that when you're putting in your application. Links below. I also have a Run the Gauntlet editing offer for people who feel that they would benefit from developmental editing, but they're not quite up to sharing their work publicly. Completely understand that. It's not everyone's cup of tea. So I have a special offer there for you to be able to trial my editing services in a pretty similar format to this. Please note, I am not able to accept every request that comes through. I only have a limited time in my work schedule for these kinds of introductory edits. I had one person last month get really angry at me when I had to very politely, I thought, say that I wasn't able to take on their project just because of my workload. I obviously have to prioritize my existing clients. So these introductory edits, there are only a few of them on offer each month. If I can't take on your project, don't take it personally. It really just is a scheduling issue. Introductory edits are super time consuming, so I can only do 1 or 2 a week. It's just the way it is, but I would love to read your work. Send it in, and early bird gets the worm. So please contact me if you're thinking about it, and I'll be happy to give one of those spots to you if I can. And there are other links below. Please check them out. Some of these link to different articles that I have written on different subjects that are covered in this conversation. So keep reading, keep improving your writing craft and growing and developing along with all of us. And thank you again for watching. I'll put up some links to other episodes of Run the Gauntlet if you want to keep watching other episodes. Otherwise, stay safe, stay healthy, keep writing, keep developing your wonderful writing craft, share your work, and comment below. Thank you for joining us, and take care. Bye.